Given the fact that the Middle East and Europe had a relationship that featured centuries of friction, it's little surprise that once the League of Nations mandates or de facto permissions to run otherwise independent countries as colonies on much of the region came to an end in 1945, Middle Easterners sought to distance themselves from Europe. Fortune quickly provided an opportunity in the former British Mandate of Palestine. There, for quite some time, Jews had been immigrating away from Europe, most notably Nazi Germany, in order to find a homeland. Urged on by documents such as the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which promised to support a Jewish homeland in Palestine, soon European Jews outnumbered natives to that region, whether they were Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. Many tensions emerged, and adherents of all religious traditions committed actions that would, frankly, today be considered terrorism. By 1948, Israel had declared its independence, and within the next 2 days, it had been recognized by both the U.S. and the USSR. Within hours, Jordanian, Syrian, Saudi, Iraqi, and Egyptian troops invaded. Set back by the Israeli counterattack, the Arabs were embarrassed that such a small state could defeat the armies of 4 Arab countries. Also emerging during this time was the lack of a popular voice that many in the Arab world felt towards their government leaders. Many were kings who had been appointed by the Europeans, and the kings were friendly to the West. Even as beaten tanks rolled out of the disputed lands, the Arabs were convinced that their kings represented selfish interests, not those of the people. Because of this friendliness to the West and the inability to defeat Israel, coupled with decadence in government, many Arab rulers were deposed. Amidst the outgrowth of nationalism that consumed much of the earlier years of the 20th century, much had been made about 2 different philosophies and how they could relate to the Middle East. The first was Pan-Arabism, which held that Arabs should ideally live in one nation-state, stretching the span of the Middle East. After all, Europeans had nation-states, and the idea of a nation-state worked remarkably well for Turkey. Why shouldn't the Arabs? Of course, such a nation-state would have been massive, stretching from Morocco to Baghdad. That did not mean that the Arabs were not willing to try, however. The best example of this was with the United Arab Republic, a union established between Syria and Egypt, both countries that had once had governments with significant ties to former European colonial powers. Suddenly, more than a third of the world's Arabs were under one government. However, it soon became clear that there were bigger differences in culture than similarities. And within 15 years, the United Arab Republic ceased to exist. Islamism, or the belief in an emphasis on the political aspects of Islam, was propagated by writers at the same time as Pan-Arabism, but took significantly longer to come around. This philosophy had a much greater appeal than Pan-Arabism, as it offered the possibility of an even larger state. As you can probably imagine, it is out of Islamism that a number of movements we think of as peculiar to the Middle East have evolved. The movement that has probably offered the most stability has been the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979, that offered the opportunity to return to an Islamic form of government. Much like earlier movements toward Pan-Arabism in other countries, this was largely done in opposition to the perceived decadence of earlier regimes. You might think that political philosophies in conflict with Israel have been the defining aspect of the Middle East for the past 70 years. However, this is far from the truth. In fact, oil has been a very powerful player. More than 50% of the world's petroleum lies in the Middle East, and it has given the rulers of the countries that own it immense power. In fact, we have seen the emergence of rentier states, or countries that can literally afford to rent back the civil liberties of their people in exchange for massive amounts of money. These countries literally pay every conceivable expense of their populations, from education and healthcare to nice government jobs with large salaries, all paid for with money from state-owned oil production. In exchange, the people lose the right to speak out against the government. Such wealth has also meant that the political agendas of those in control become much easier to finance. Even today, experts estimate that a sizable percentage of the money that ends up financing extremist action around the world comes from Arab oil wealth. Along with aspects of terrorism, rapid growth has also meant rapid inequalities, especially among guest workers. A banker in Dubai may make $400,000 a year, but it's unlikely that her company-provided driver makes more than $140 a month. In this lesson, we looked at how the Middle East has developed from 1945 to the present. Israel initially presented a challenge for many Arab leaders, and due to a lack of resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict, many Arab kings were dethroned in favor of pan-Arabism or Islamism. Both ideologies offered to not only unite the Middle East, but also defeat Israel. However, the story of the Middle East in the last few decades has been largely the story of oil. Petroleum has made some countries so rich that they can afford to be rentier states, while it has also created vast gulfs of inequality and financed terrorism.